I am Professor Lynn Porter from Fairfield University, and this is my lecture on mid-century modern architecture and decor. These are the topics I'm going to cover in this lecture: when we are in the world and what's going on, the characteristics of the mid-century modern style, and we're going to unpack two different forms, the geometric modern style and the organic modern style. We're going to look at some inspiration for the geometric modern before we look at four different examples of the geometric mid-century modern style. We'll also look at a domestic building in the geometric style, the Farnsworth House, and some furniture in that style. We'll then look at the organic mid-century modern style, some examples there, as well as the domestic building and furniture. So when are we talking about? We're talking about the 1930s through the 1960s. The style was visible by the end of World War I, but it wasn't terribly popular, but it became much more the dominant style after World War II. So really we're talking about the style flourishing from 1945 up into the 1960s. And the US was the style leader, probably because World War II wasn't fought on American soil. So what's going on socially? Following World War II, America was very quick to convert all of the industries that had been working in the war effort and convert them into working for civilian production. So that was a key thing. And this is a period of optimism in the United States. The US has become a world industrial leader, literally producing half of the world's goods, chemicals, and electronics. That's huge. And that leads to a booming economy with new jobs and the standard of living on the way up. More people owning homes, more people moving into the middle class, white collar work expanding, not just blue collar, but white collar work is also expanding. More people are going to college and more women are entering the workforce. Of course, this is still a lopsided boom because people of color are being held back from some of these expansions in opportunity. But where there is great optimism, there is also pessimism because this is the time of the Cold War. And that's the time of intense hostility between the United States and the USSR. So you have this fear of nuclear war literally decimating the planet. There is this fear of the spread of communism. And there is this consumer debt increase. Everyone's owning a home, but everyone's buying things on time. So everything is not rosy in the world. And of course, minorities do not experience the prosperity that the white communities in America are experiencing. What are the technological and industrial advances of the period? We have chemical engineering advances that lead to vinyl and lucite, human-made products that imitate things that can be made from Mother Nature. You have the invention of television. You have penicillin. You have plastics and aluminum becoming hugely popular after the war. You have the transistor being invented. You have the polio vaccine. And then you also have the beginning of the space race between the USSR with their satellite Sputnik and the United States with their first satellite, the Explorer 1. What are the main concepts of mid-century modern? Visually, as a style, this is about a huge break with the past. Everything that has happened before no longer counts. We are living in a very modern world. We are living in the space age, and so we need to have modern solutions to modern problems, which means visually you're going to see that we're getting rid of anything that's traditional or anything that feels like it's based in something from the past. This is design for the present. In fact, this is even a rejection of the idea of style. So we're looking for solutions to our problems in modern science and technology. This is the space age. So we come up with this new design concept called functionalism. Form follows function. Whatever the function is of this structure, that is what is going to determine its form. So what are the real hallmarks of the style, the characteristics? We're talking about simplicity. We're talking about minimal decoration. We're talking about things that can be mass produced. So they're designed to be produced quickly. So it's a question of standardization. And we're also using new materials and new methods. We're using aluminum, we're using plastics, and we're able to prefabricate certain pieces so we can assemble them together on site, kind of like Legos. So this is a whole new way of thinking about construction. And there are two basic ways that these ideas are being expressed. The first is geometric modern, and the second is organic modern. So, starting with geometric modern, we're talking about rectilinear lines. We're talking about clean geometry. We're talking about designing in grids and having a regularity, not necessarily a symmetry, but a regularity, kind of a geometric regularity. And you will see either flat and transparent facades or glass curtain walls or concrete being used to express heaviness and the sense of monumentality. The geometric modern style grew in America, but it was influenced very much by several architects working in Europe. One of those was Corbusier, who is a Swiss French architect, and he developed the 5 points of a new kind of architecture in 1923. He said that we should replace the supporting walls, like the structure that holds the whole building up, and just replace them with concrete columns. And if we have these columns, that means without all of those walls holding things up, we 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 can rearrange the whole inside ground plan of a house. He's totally upending the concept of a house. He also wants a free design of the facade. So the exterior of the building is separated from the idea of I have to hold up a building here. He very much loves a long horizontal window, which cuts across the entire facade length. And he loves his flat roofs and roof gardens. So he's building houses that have a purpose to them more than just being a house. Now it is part of how you can live in your community. Sounds kind of interesting, doesn't it? Let's take a look at one of the iconic buildings. Here you have Villa Savoy, designed by Corbusier, and you see the building is held up by this series of columns all along the ground level, which means that the outside of the building, the facade, can be anything that you want it to be. He loves that long horizontal window. You see what I mean about long horizontal windows? And that means that everything inside of the house can now be rearranged. The flat roof, everything about this building has been completely reconceived from any form of house up to this point in human history. So let's look at the iconic buildings of this style in the United States. We're going to look at these four buildings: the Museum of Modern Art, the United Nations Secretariat Building, the Seagram Building, and the Whitney Museum of American Art. Starting with the MoMA. Now, the building I'm talking about here is the original structure of the MoMA, which has since been redesigned multiple times. Here you can see the facade of the Museum of Modern Art in this photograph from the early 1950s. And I show you this photograph because I want you to notice how this building is so modern compared to the rest of the buildings on the block. Can you see that? You look at the buildings either side, the rest of the block, and they feel very much like they were built in the 1800s, but the MoMA is all about looking forward. So it's this long glass expanse. And in this model of the building, you see how that top tier has those circular skylights. So it's very geometric and it's very grid oriented. This building emphasizes its rectilinear nature and it has that flat, transparent facade. You see how this is a simple building, it's a simple idea. And also just thinking about decoration, we don't really have any applied decoration. All we have is the basic blocky forms. We see that idea continued in the United Nations Secretariat building, which is a tall, slender rectangle of glass. And speaking of glass, this building is the first building in New York City that has a glass curtain wall. We're used to seeing curtain walls now, but this was the first one. And when I say a curtain wall, I mean the outside skin of the building is glass, but that's not structural. The structure is carried on the inside of the building so that all of the exterior side of the building can just be this unbroken, beautiful pane of glass. So the style is undecorated. The shape of the building is the shape it needs to be in order to serve its function. There is no decoration. The entire thing is very geometric. Even the shape of the driveway in front is a beautiful curve there, right? So I hope you could see what I'm talking about when I say this is a rectilinear style. Its emphasis is on grids and everything being regular. And this flat, transparent glass curtain wall is one of the defining features. Another iconic building in the geometric modern style is the Seagram Building in New York. It is a simple, tall, rectangular building. It's 38 stories tall and it has this large plaza in front of it. This building also has that glass curtain wall with the vertical mullions between the windows made out of brass. The mullions are the structural pieces between the pieces of glass. So again, this is a simple building with no applied decoration. This seems to evoke the idea of standardization and certainly modernization. I want to show you one more building in the geometric modern style, the Whitney Museum of American Art. Now, this is the building, it's also called the Brewer Building, named after the architect. This is the building that opened in the 1960s. This is a building that definitely shocked the neighbors. And while there was a huge uproar about this building when it was first installed, people came to really embrace the idea that the museum itself, the building itself, has been raised to the level of an art form. It is a 5-story building. It's covered with granite. It's granite clad, and it's kind of an inverted ziggurat or a step pyramid. So eventually this building was embraced for its distinctive profile and weird features, these asymmetrical windows. Inside the structure, you have concrete grid ceilings that are suspended over flagstone floors. So this is a building that very much leaned into those very hard, solid, massive stone elements. And so I wanted to show you this building in comparison to the skyscrapers I've been showing you, because this still counts as geometric modern, because instead of using that flat, transparent facade, here we're using stone and concrete to express the idea of monumentality. And if you've been to the Whitney recently, you may be thinking, wait a minute, that isn't what the building looks like. And that's absolutely true. About 3 or 4 years ago, the Whitney moved out of this museum into an infinitely bigger building because they were always fighting with the ability to fit the artwork into the gallery space. This building you're looking at here was always too confining. And this structure is now controlled by the Metropolitan Museum of Art. So it's still a museum, but it's no longer the Whitney. But just one more time, reviewing the features of the geometric modern style, you see this is a rectilinear building. You see that this is about geometry and grids and regularity. It's not a symmetrical building, but it is a regular building. And you have these incredibly flat planes. Let's look at how the geometric modern style has been applied in domestic architecture. I want to show you the Farnsworth House. This is a one-room house designed on a 9-acre plot. It was designed originally as a weekend retreat for a doctor in Chicago. She wanted a place to get out of town. So, yeah, what's going on here? Well, I think you can see that there's a rectilinear form here. You see these very clean lines, the total lack of decoration. In fact, this house feels like it's totally made of glass. Of course, it's not all made of glass. There is the floor and there is the ceiling, but it's these columns in the middle that hold up the entire structure. So we don't have walls holding up the ceiling, we just have these columns. Let me show you a diagram. Here we have a ground plan of the building. And just for reference, those 3 columns that I just put a blue box around are here, here, and here. So the entire structure is held up by those columns. And then you have this inner area here, that where I'm putting a blue line now is a glass wall. And then all of the basic working parts of the house are in this one small area. And here you have the legend. You have a guest bath here. You have a mechanical room here. You have the master bath here. Kitchen is over on this side. And then you have a fireplace here on this side. You also have a goodly sized basically deck area here without a ceiling, and then another large deck here. In fact, there's more outdoor space than indoor space with this building. The 2 areas that I just circled, I'll put an X in them. These areas do not have a roof over top. Here we are inside that main living area looking out. Here is the fireplace here on the right-hand side. So we're looking out onto this vista, onto this land. This is a property that absolutely embraces the idea of getting back to nature. Indeed, it has more outdoor space than it has indoor space. And it's interesting to think about. Here we are in the middle of the 20th century. This idea of modern, the idea of urbanization has taken such a strong hold that now we need to push back against that and start to think about how we can reconnect with nature. So you have this uber modern building designed to help you connect back to Mother Nature. How cool is that? Looking at some furniture in the geometric modern style, you see the same ideas from the architecture playing out in the furniture. Looking at the top image, the Knoll sofa and lounge chair, you see this is very simple. It is rectilinear. It has flat silhouettes. It is based on a grid. So all of those same ideas are carried out here. At the bottom, you have some very famous chairs designed by a very famous couple. Charles and Ray Eames were very famous industrial designers from the middle of the 20th century. So these chairs probably still look familiar because they've had a very long impact on furniture and industrial design. In fact, if you have ever been in an airport, here's some pictures from Chicago O'Hare. There is the Eames tandem sling seating chair and bench seating that they designed that uses all of the ideas I've been talking about here. Yes, they're a little bit more curved because humans have to sit in them for long periods of time, but they still have that simplicity. These feel like they've been standardized, like there's the 2 seat, the 4 seat, the 6 seat, but they're all essentially the same. We're still using new materials. We're using aluminums and plastics. We're using things that can be prefabricated. So everything we've been talking about here today shows up in these airport chairs. So remember I said that in addition to geometric modern, there is an organic modern form. It still is based on those overall concepts of simplicity and lack of decoration, standardization, using new materials and new methods. So while the geometric modern form is about rectangles and grids, the organic modern form is about smooth, curving shapes and shapes that are abstracted and elongated, sometimes pierced, and very asymmetrical. So this is like things that Mother Nature grows for us. We're going to see some abstracted, exaggerated forms like a tulip form and an hourglass, amoeba, a kidney, a boomerang form, believe it or not. And the curves can be very long and flowing, undulating, asymmetrical. So this is a very different take on the idea of modern. In terms of the public buildings in this style, we're going to look at these four structures. Notre Dame de TWA Terminal at JFK, the Sydney Opera House, and the Guggenheim Museum in New York. I'm not going to torture you anymore with my bad French pronunciation. The name of this church is translated to Our Lady on the Hill or Our Lady of the Heights. And yes, it is on a hill. It's actually on a site that had another Christian chapel on it that was built in the 4th century, but that church was destroyed during World War II, so a new building had to be built after the war. Let's see what it looks like. There you go. It looks exactly like all of the churches we've looked at in this class, doesn't it? Okay, maybe not at all. How interesting. What is it we're even looking at? Look at those walls. They're really thick. They're massively thick walls made of concrete and stone. In fact, some of the stone that they used in the concrete was from that 4th century chapel that had been destroyed in World War II. And it's also comparatively small. And it has this bizarre, wonderful, swooping, upturned roof to it, doesn't it? I think you can see why this style is called organic. This building looks like it grew. Let's look at it from the other side. Wow, there is no space on this building that is regular. This is clearly a conscious attempt to try to reinvent the idea of a church. And now that we're inside, I think you can see how small this church actually is. So we have these massively thick walls. Look at those window openings. We can't even see the glass on the other side. The wall is so thick. And look at the top of the wall. There is a long, skinny window separating the top of the wall from the roof. In fact, those are still called clear story windows, but they don't look like the clear story windows we were seeing in those Gothic cathedrals, right? So, one of the defining features of being inside this church is this soft light. And it's light that's being reflected around off of the inside of these white concrete walls. So, I hope you can see what I mean about the organic modern style. We have these smooth, curving forms, and they're long and they're flowing, and everything is asymmetrical and even undulating. This is not at all what we were seeing with the geometric modern style. Let's look at something on American soil. Let's look at the TWA Terminal at JFK Airport. This building looks so futuristic. You can clearly see that it was built at the beginning of the space age. So, what is this thing about? What are we even looking at here? I suppose the main feature is that roof. It's this curving thin shell roof made out of concrete. And while it's technically a thin shell, the thickness of the concrete varies. At the very far edges, it's only 7 inches thick, but when it gets down closer to the center, when it lowers down, it gets as thick as 40 inches. And the entire structure is held up by four massive piers. Remember piers from those Gothic churches, those massive columns that held up everything? Here we have piers. I'm going to outline it in blue. This is a Y-shaped pier right there that is holding up that entire structure. There's another one right over there. So while it looks like those massive windows are holding up that roof, they aren't doing it at all. It's just those Y-shaped piers that are doing all the work. And before we go inside, I want to point out that in this crease in between the different layers of the shell, they put in skylights. Let's see what it looks like from the inside. When you look up, you realize why they put in those skylights. Isn't that amazing the way it emphasizes the line of the roof itself? So this interior space is 3 levels high. And in addition to all of these curved forms, you have these massive windows. So again, you have these smooth curving forms with these long, beautiful flowing lines. There's a lot of asymmetry going on. Yes, this is an organic looking building, isn't it? I just want to share one thing. Because this building was so famous, they couldn't tear it down when it was no longer useful as an airline terminal. So it has very recently been renovated into a hotel. It opened just in 2019. So now there is a TWA hotel instead of a TWA terminal at JFK. Okay, if we're going to talk about curved roofs, we have to look at the Sydney Opera House. This is on the harbour in Sydney, Australia. And while it's called an opera house, it's actually a performing arts center with multiple venues. There's several different theaters and concert halls in this building, as well as a recording studio and restaurants and bars and lots of places to gather. This was the winner of an international design competition in the 1950s. The building didn't open until the 1970s because it was so complex to build. So, what are we looking at? Obviously, the most dynamic feature of this structure is those curved roof lines. But before we get to that, look underneath that and you see all of those straight lines and straight walls. That's called the podium, and that's where the curving elements of the ceiling are supported. And then there's that ceiling. Good Lord, it's a series of concrete shelves forming all of the roofs over the structure. And the construction of this building is really a fascinating story because in the original design that won the competition, all of those shapes were free-form organic shapes, but engineers couldn't figure out how to build them in any way that was cost effective. So then they conceived the shells as a series of parabolas with precast concrete ribs, but still that meant that every shape was a unique shape. Nothing was repeatable, and engineers couldn't figure out how to build them. So the design team actually went through at least 12 different iterations of ideas on how to structure these shells so you could actually build them. And it took them years to figure out how to even start building the ceiling. They figured it out in 1961. They figured out that the shells, all of those shapes, are sections from a sphere. So those are repeatable shapes, not unique shapes. And that decision allowed for the construction of all of those beautiful shapes. And of course, if you're going to have a striking building like this, you're going to have some really striking lighting. So yeah, here we are, organic, modern style with these smooth curving forms that feel more like they grew, that Mother Nature grew them than humans built them. You have these long flowing shapes, you have asymmetry, you have these beautiful irregular lines. Another iconic building in the organic modern style is the Guggenheim Museum, designed by Frank Lloyd Wright. Mr. Guggenheim was a big collector of early modern art, and he needed a place to display all of his artwork. And so Frank Lloyd Wright was hired to design a Temple of the Spirit. And there you have it. The biggest feature of this building is this truncated cone situation that you see here. And of course, the original design is never what eventually ends up being built. So while Mr. Wright wanted the exterior to be a reddish stone, it turns out that it was concrete because of the cost of construction. But the real glory of this building is on the inside. Here we are in the main rotunda. This is the inside of that truncated cone. And you see those floors going up around the walls. That's actually one very, very, very long ramp. It's a continuous ramp that goes from this floor we're standing on here all the way up to that skylight. So this is a radically new way to conceive of a museum of art. I mean, up to this point, museums were just a series of interconnected rooms, and a visitor would walk from room to room to room. And here he's saying, no, you take the elevator up to the top, and then you walk down this very gentle, pleasing ramp with the artwork hung on the exterior walls. And so you have this continuous flow from artwork to artwork to artwork. This spiral design is similar to a nautilus shell with these continuously flowing spaces. And as we saw with the earlier photographs of the Whitney Museum of American Art, the building itself is conceived to be a work of art. Going back to our key characteristics for mid-century modern, this is a very simple building, and that with no decoration. The building is its own decoration, so it's all about the mass and the shape itself. You have these smooth curving forms and this flow to the building, and the flow is not just in the shape, but the flow is in how humans interact with the shape. But I have to show you a domestic building in the organic style. So of course we have to go to Falling Water. And while this building isn't technically mid-century modern, it was before that, it was built in the 30s, it still is deeply organic. Let me show you what I mean. This building is considered one of Frank Lloyd Wright's greatest masterpieces, and the American Institute of Architects has named it the best all-time work of American architecture. So of course I had to show it to you, right? This was designed for the Kaufman family, who had this piece of land in western Pennsylvania with this beautiful river running through it. And there was this jutting rock overlooking this waterfall that they loved to picnic at. And so they requested that Frank Lloyd Wright build on that site. They requested several separate bedrooms as well as large areas where they could throw parties. And Wright, look at what he did. He designed the home to literally sit over the waterfall. I mean, seriously, water runs under the building. And Apparently, Mr. Kaufman wasn't terribly pleased with this because he expected to be able to sit in his new house and look at the water falling instead of just hear the water underneath the floor. Okay, let's talk about the structure itself. This building uses numerous cantilevers. Now, a cantilever is an engineering feat where you have something heavy extended out over nothingness. We haven't seen a lot of this in this class. Usually, when something is held up or extended out over the air, there's a wall or a series of columns or an arcade holding up that edge. But a cantilever is designed and engineered in a way that you don't have to hold up the edge. The rest of the building holds down the edge of the structure that's connected to the building. So cantilevers have this kind of magical look to them because they feel like they're just floating out over midair. This is a very dynamic building, and it is fully integrated with the natural surroundings of where it sits. And yes, there's rectilinear lines, but they're long horizontal spaces. And with those horizontal lines and these natural building materials, they just blend into the horizontal lines that Mother Nature grows for us. Here we are in the living room. You see what I mean about it being a long horizontal line? And directly under this floor, there is a moving river. So the sound of that moving water, it just permeates throughout the entire house. The building features boulders that were literally found on the site. In fact, in front of the fireplace here, there's a ledge rock that protrudes up through the living room floor. That was the rock that the Kaufman family liked to sit on over the waterfall. But now here it is, it's actually the hearth of the house. And there's another thing of integrating the man-made elements with the natural elements. You can see here this is a long horizontal windows with those horizontal beams emphasizing the horizontal element of the window. But there's not a window frame per se. Where the glass hits the stone, it actually goes into a groove cut into the stone. So you don't have this long horizontal line interrupted by metal window frames. Frank Lloyd Wright believed that an architecture that embraces nature will be pleasing to the people who live in that building. It's truly an amazing place, and when you're in Western Pennsylvania, you have to stop in. All right, I promised I would talk about furniture in the organic modern style. And here you have two iconic chairs in this style. You see they are simple. You see they have no applied decoration. These are designed for mass production. They're standardized. They use plastics. They're prefabricated. But all of these shapes are these smooth, curving forms. And just as we saw with some of the furniture from the 17 and 1800s, Hepplewhite and Sheridan and Chippendale, you also see versions of these two chairs in a lot of contemporary spaces. In fact, in the Quick Center for the Arts, there's dozens of chairs that are based on that original Eames molded plastic chair. Here you have a few other pieces of furniture. Here at the top, you see plastic being used. It's been injection molded. It's this smooth, beautiful, organic form. Again, these chairs, this table, they feel like they grew up out of the floor. They don't feel like a carpenter with a straight edge and a saw built them, right? Down at the bottom, you have one of the most famous chairs ever, the Eames Lounge chair. This chair has been in continuous production for almost 70 years, and they are still popular, and they're incredibly comfortable. So even though these chairs were designed in the middle of the 20th century, they're still very popular now that we're in the 21st century. So, yeah, I have talked about a lot of things here today, right? Thank you for your time.